In this presentation, I would like to describe a best practice approach to musical instrument training that may have an impact on students' social life and inner well-being. Music is a powerful tool for the well-being of those who make it and those who listen to it. During the pandemic, we experienced a historical moment of which the psychological consequences on the younger generations are just now beginning to be discovered. In the 19th, I studied improvisation teaching with Luisa Di Segni. Together, we experimented strategies which led us, as adult musicians, to discover creative and musical qualities in ourselves which had been kept hidden from us during our years of traditional instrumental training. And these are the strategies which I use in my teacher training classes with adult conservatory students. My students are young trained musicians who often work already and who wish to specialize in teaching. I work with them on piano and improvisation practice. Today, I want to talk about our classes on practice and teaching of piano improvisation. Generally, this approach involves group work in which each participant imagines him or herself in the position of someone who has no previous musical knowledge. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, for a long time it was impossible for us to do teamwork or to work on movement, as we all know. We had the chance to work directly in person in groups of maximum of 3 people and the others online. Over the months between the beginning of November and the end of April, I realized that the Dalcroze improvisation became an opportunity for social encounter, for an inner openness that had been severely tested by the lockdown, for looking into oneself and of one's ability to express and represent him or herself between a group that acts as a mirror and a driving force for further development of the characteristics of each participant. Ultimately, we discovered how powerful this tool was for achieving inner well-being in a place of the conservatory, where traditionally the main purpose of the study is the acquisition of technical expressive skills. This time, music was a medium and no longer as an end in itself. Our approach was turned inside out before our eyes, not immediately, but with the passing of the weeks through the logbooks of the students. About the function of improvisation in Dalcroze, Dalcrozian improvisation proposes a natural approach respecting the pedagogical principles of the methodology. Improvisation is generally conceived as the ability to fill and juxtapose previously acquired structures. As John Sloboda says, the composer and improviser obtain an aesthetic result by finding new and surprising ways to embellish a frame, without changing its basic characteristics. On the contrary, Dalcrozian improvisation constitutes a path of exploration and appropriation aimed at learning those structures. Starting from the gesture in space, then brought back to the instrument, in our case the piano, in a sort of exploration of the sound object, we arrive at the discovery of its expressive characteristics. Once our palette of colors and tools has been created, we become aware of the elements that make up the musical material, and so we can play with it as we do with Legos, becoming aware of the structures. This work is a story which I also want to tell through the logbooks of my students. In the logbooks, the students were invited to explain the activities carried out during the course, following a principle of graduality and understanding the pedagogical motivations. I also asked them to express spontaneously their impressions of their way of participating and what they had noticed in the group of participants. Here's how we worked. We started by exploring the piano through different dimensions: motor, spatial, and expressive. The interdisciplinary framework draws inspiration from a study of life and human nature and can include references to the visual arts, to literature, to architecture. We worked with the elements of our technical expressive palette as though we were playing with Legos. This approach allowed us to gradually identify the structures present in the improvisations, starting from repetitions and contrasts. Starting from the contrast between clusters and single sounds, we arrived to add the structures AB, ABA, and rondeau. Extracts from the diaries in relation to the contents and methods of carrying out the course.
Ludovico writes, induce self-listening in students in order to emancipate them. This is the beginning of the first sheet of my notebook. In one sentence, the synthesis of two fundamental aspects: the ear, the medium through which the sound passes and from which everything begins, which must be educated to listen to oneself and the others, and the concept of autonomy, independence. But can a child really be autonomous? I've never been independent in my studio, at least not in the early days. Now, I discover that someone thinks that from the first lesson one can and must work on this direction. First of all, you have to discover the instrument by playing with it and have fun. So, go immediately in search of its possibilities, dynamics, registers, white keys, black keys, intervals. If I play on the right, higher notes come out. If on the left, lower notes. Depending on how much energy or weight I put on, the tool reacts accordingly. Thus, the first elements of what we call our palette start appearing. We write them on the left side of the blackboard. On the right, we write the implications of an emotional nature that we feel in the improvisations of other students: discomfort, fun, research, going to words, restlessness. About the error, he goes on, working with already trained musicians, some tricks are needed, such as playing as if the fingers were glued to eliminate the melodic harmonic problem and overcome the concept of error, which creates psychological blocks on improvisations. This frees the archaic nature of the relationship with music. In short, the game allows you to free yourself.
Federica. During classes, we continued to play and improvise on the piano, often with free rhythm and without referring to a tonal system, precisely to highlight other aspects of the music that are very often overlooked, such as dynamics, different densities, the sound environments, the quality of the sound, the different registers through clusters, glissandos, and every other gesture that became sound. Raffaella, at a certain point, thanks to the work of another student, we introduced the concept of silence into our palette. Immediately after him, it was my turn, and I had an improvisation prepared from home, but I felt it was too tight, too noisy now that I had discovered silence.
Carlo writes, the task of the educator in this context is to highlight the musical characters already present in the students and to expand their expressive possibilities through a path of in-depth study of the various aspects of music, not necessarily linked to the knowledge of notation, theory, harmony, rules. Rosario. One thing that surprised me the most was the following. After each improvisation, the teacher would thank the student for the gift that had been given. What, in an academic logic, was nothing more than a set of notes played at random, was instead the first stage of a fundamental journey to discover one's own musical self. All this based on the observation of classmates under the guidance of the teacher. The matter of music was treated through a non-deductive but rather inductive approach. Carlo again. From the juxtaposition of tones and semitones, we have identified major and minor pentachords, and from here towards the hexatonal, chromatic, octophonic scale and modes. Thanks to these languages, we have moved on to the exploration of defined soundscapes. Giacomo writes, from the second lesson, group workshop spaces took shape among the students with the task of sounding a Kandinsky painting, focusing on the sound relationships identified in the first lesson, such as the relationship between sound and silence, between clusters and single notes, dynamics, long or short sounds, dense or dilated rhythms. The different performances have highlighted the different sensibilities and musical experiences of individuals and the infinite possibilities of interpreting a non-traditional score by alternating performances based on colors with others on forms, up to interpretations focused on some details of the work. This work was also followed by a phase of collective analysis and listening during class hours.
Once a harmonic sequence in the Misolidian mode had been worked out together, the students at that point of the year in online learning were divided into small groups and elaborated it as follows. 1. Meeting online with discussion on the topic and planning of a joint final work. 2. Everyone improvises on the sequence, producing an audio file. 3. A group leader reprocesses the received audio products with Audacity, creating a final elaborate. I want to present here an extract of a final product of a group of musicians from the early music department and of a group of musicians from the jazz department. In the final feedback phase, these students said that they were able to relate to each other, evaluating and choosing the different ideas and creating a rewarding product. The path of spontaneous expression, they said, had placed them in a serene and profitable relationship, highlighting the formative value of music from a social point of view, in a context of heuristic and student-centered teaching. With regard to heuristic and student-centered teaching, here are some observations on the role of the teacher in this type of lesson. Raffaella. Our teacher never made statements or made judgments. She always asked us what the group thought, what we could observe, what we had to say. This has always put us in a state of curiosity and attention throughout the duration of our lessons, but also in a condition of ease and openness. The opinion of each member of the group counts. My sensation is as important as yours, and what this improvisation transmits to me is unique, but at the same time is shared with those who performed it and with those who were listening to it with me. Therefore, improvisation is not only a doing, but also a listening and a receiving. This is really interesting.
Ludovico writes, I didn't like the piano because it required solitary work. I consider the group a suitable and necessary emotional environment in music as well as in life in general. We noticed in the class that in an observed moment like this of pandemic and social distancing, we're getting to know each other through music, discovering through our diversity, our wealth. Antonello writes, what we have done has allowed me in the first place to overcome many of my fears. It enabled me to experience the freedom that surrounds me. It taught me to trust the other and to get to know her or him by interpreting what she or he improvised. This course encouraged us to open the limits of imagination and knowledge, but lulled us into what is the final result. It has greatly enriched my self-confidence and esteem. I thought I could not be a musician or a teacher, but I realized that with the right means and the right path, this will be possible again. I felt reborn. In all this, even the moments of despair helped me, especially the initial ones, when I did not feel connected with everything yet. In the end, we went back home enriched not only musically, but above all, enriched for life. How beautiful is the group, and how beautiful is sharing within a group. This was a revelation for me, because I had already been part of musical communities, such as orchestras or quartets, but the resonance and empathy that moved in our course was far greater. Gabriele writes, I had to work a little to achieve that wonderful sensation that allows you to see the instruments no longer as a producer of sounds, but as a prompter of emotions, ideas, sounds that are not found in the present, but elsewhere and in another time. We try to draw something from that dimension to bring it back to ours, using the only dimensional door we know, our soul.
Final observations of the students. Elisabetta. The improvisation practice and didactics course stimulated contrasting and not always positive emotions, such as discomfort, the fear of making a mistake, of exposing myself, but also opposite emotions linked to exploration and to the pleasure of learning a new way of being and appearing. In this process, all the participants made a fundamental contribution to my increased awareness of the emotional and affective aspects related to make music. Chiara, we are all very happy with ourselves, with our results. It is a team that works, that proceeds together. Probably the difficult conditions in which we find ourselves due to the COVID make us feel even more successful. Now there is a climate of trust, of empathy. The classroom is resonant. I feel proud of myself and my teammates. Georgia, for me, who come from an academic course of study, it was a precious and useful revolution of perspective also for daily practice with my first instrument, the cello, as well as for my training as a teacher. The fact that this stimulus has touched me in an extended time like the pandemic one has made me more open to questioning myself, more receptive to change. Chiara, I perceived the pandemic as a kind of curtain that separated me from people, When we improvised in front of each other, we could perceive moods, fears, and when we finally let ourselves go, the curtain slipped away and I felt united with all of them. Here's my conclusions. Through the improvisational approach based on Dalcrozian principles, it is possible to implement a kind of teaching based on what Hartmut Rosa defines as resonance space, even in difficult circumstances such as the isolation due to the pandemic. The climate of trust, of discovery, of play with the sound material contributes to a profound sense of well-being and to the birth of what Dalcroze defines as inner joy, which can be reached through self-awareness and through our invaluable relationships with others.